When they won, I was over the moon. When they lost, I was cast into despair. In 1971, the Knicks were in the semifinal playoffs against the Baltimore Bullets. The series went to 7 games, and the Milwaukee Bucks, which were then in the Western Division, had already finished their series and were waiting for the winner of this last game. There's a player on the Bullets named Earl Monroe, nicknamed Earl of Pearl. He was a shooting guard, and he was devastating against the Knicks. He was also quite arrogant. He referred to himself as a scoring machine, and even, now this is 47 years later, and I still remember it, even saying before the 7th game that he already had his hotel reservations in Milwaukee. Was there a player I loathed and hated more than Earl Monroe? Not that year, there wasn't, especially after the Bullets beat the Knicks in that 7th game. Then, over that summer, Earl Monroe was traded from the Bullets to the Knicks. What did I do? Did I vent my fury at the Knicks management for getting such an obnoxious player for our team? Did I turn my head away every time he appeared in a Knicks uniform on my family television? I did not. Once he became a Knick, he became one of my favorite players. He hadn't changed at all. The only thing that changed was his uniform. But that was enough for me. What can I say? I was 12 years old. My changing loyalties, my ability to turn on a dime and start cheering for someone I had previously hated, struck me even then as a little dubious. My father thought it was the funniest thing in the world and frequently reminded me of this in later years. I am, fortunately or unfortunately, not that kind of Knicks fan anymore. But that experience gave me insight into what it means to identify with a group, to take your place in a tribe. We all have tribes that we're part of. Some of them we choose, some of them we're born into. Some of those tribes are very large, nations, religions. Some of them are smaller, sports teams, schools, families. We're human beings, we're social animals. We're basically built to seek out groups of fellow human beings with whom we share things in common. George Orwell, when he talked about nationalism in the reading, doesn't just mean loyalty to nation states. He makes it clear that he's talking about loyalty to a group, identification with a group so strong that it biases us. My identification with the Knicks caused me to close my eyes to the very things I hated about Monroe once he was doing those things for our team. This was pretty harmless overall and provided innocent entertainment for my father. But a lot of times, that kind of blindness our identifications with our tribes creates does cause harm. We can all come up with an example. There are people who were fans of the Penn State football team, and in particular, the team's legendary coach, Joe Paterno. In 2011, when Jerry Sandusky, a defensive coordinator for the Penn State team, was charged with sexual abuse, and it came out that Paterno knew about the abuse but chose to do nothing to stop it, there were numbers of fans who were furious. Not so much about the abuse as about the accusations against Paterno, angry that his football legacy was being tainted by this scandal. There were Penn State fans who were more angry that the victims went to the press and the authorities than that there had been an atmosphere of abuse for decades, which Paterno and the school covered up. Years after the scandals, Penn State is still dealing with people who are angry about the way Paterno was treated. It's entirely possible that some of Paterno's supporters genuinely believe that Sandusky did nothing wrong, and Paterno had no responsibility to supervise the person working for him. I don't believe all his supporters feel that way, though. I believe that most of these people are against sexual abuse. I believe they feel a person has a responsibility to protect children from a staff person who's abusing them. Most people, most of Paterno's supporters, would, I'm sure, be angry at someone who hears credible reports of abuse and then covers them up. If this were happening to another group, to someone else, most of these people, I'm sure, would call for justice for the victims. But because Joe Paterno was a prominent member of their tribe, all that fell by the wayside. We've seen this with other groups, too. People who identify as Republicans and hold their noses, or don't even hold their noses, and support whatever their president does, even when what he does is in direct opposition to what they claim to stand for otherwise. Tariffs are bad, unless their president is imposing them. Lying about a fare is cause for a president's impeachment, but a president who lies about everything is just being himself, and that's okay. Waterboarding is torture and a war crime when the Japanese do it in World War II. But when we do it in Guantanamo Bay, it's not a crime at all. It's not even torture. It's just harsh interrogation techniques. The party is pro-life and pro-child, but it's all right to separate even breastfeeding children from their parents if the parents enter the country illegally. Again, I'm sure some of these people actually have no problem with these behaviors, maybe even think they're right. But I also believe that most of these people would honestly say that torture is wrong, that endless lying is wrong, that separating young children from their parents is wrong, as long as it's the other side doing it. All right, so far, I've been cheating a little bit, giving the easy cases. I can look at the diehard fans of Penn State football and say they're out of line because I'm not one of them. Although, as you can see from my Knicks story, I might have come close to that if the situation arose. I can look at the supporters of President Trump and say they're hypocrites because that's not my tribe, and I can see them clearly. But they're not all easy cases. I'm a white woman, and I consider myself a feminist. When I learn that the majority of white women support policies I find abhorrent, or people I find abhorrent, I have a hard time processing that information, or even actually believing it. When I read articles about how white feminists are closing ranks against people of color, or excluding trans women, or otherwise treating feminism as a club for elite white women, I'm uncomfortable. My first gut reaction is to say, no, that can't be true. My people wouldn't do that. Or I try to find ways to minimize the behavior. Not all white women, not all white feminists. But if I'm honest, and I'm trying to be honest, and I look at the facts, I can see truth in the accusations, and I can see that, yeah, even my tribe is capable of oppressing other people, of undermining its own ideals. And that gives me a way of seeing when I'm getting ready to compromise myself, my true values, to protect my tribe. When I get that defensive feeling, when I want to skip over that particular article or interrupt that particular story, when I can hardly listen or read on and understand what's being said, because I'm so busy making excuses and finding justifications and getting annoyed at the person making the complaint or bringing up the problem. Yeah, that's it. I think if we think about it, if we're honest, we can all come up with times when each of us chose to bend the facts, ignore our moral compass even slightly to protect someone in our tribe, whatever chosen tribe that is. As Orwell says, you can't get away from it. You have this bias. I have this bias. We all have our biases. And if we're not actively working to notice them and work past them, they will change the way that we see the world and the way that we act in the world. Is there anything we can do to look beyond what's good or bad for our tribe and do what's right? Yes, though it's hard work. And that's one reason why most of the times we default to following our tribe's biases. As Orwell says, the first thing is to know who you are. Who you are is more than just who you're affiliated with. You're not just an American, a New Yorker, a Democrat, a Unitarian Universalist, a Knicks fan. You're all those things. Well, maybe not a Knicks fan. And sometimes you can use one of those affiliations to look critically at the other ones. Perhaps the Democrats are doing something that isn't in keeping with your values as a Unitarian Universalist. And perhaps you can look at that objectively without defaulting to, well, the other side is worse, and letting it stop there. Sometimes it helps to have a role model for that. As anyone can tell from my name, I'm Irish American. And when I was growing up, going to Catholic school, there were basically two tribes in the school, the Irish and the Italians, and our side was, of course, the better of the two. But at the time that I was identifying with the Irish, the Boston desegregation crisis was going on. And the news from Boston was all about the terrible behavior of the white people who were fighting against busing. The white people who were almost exclusively Irish American, living in heavily Irish American communities like South Boston and Charlestown. It would have been possible, I guess, for my parents to find excuses, or change the subject, or ignore the violence in Boston altogether. But my mother, who was Irish American herself, but also a good Catholic, wouldn't do that. Her core value was not being Irish American. Her core value was loving your neighbor no matter who your neighbor was. She was appalled that it was our people who were resisting integration in such an ugly way. And she made it clear that just because they were Irish, they didn't get a free pass. Quite the contrary. I think my mother expected them to behave better than other people because they were Irish Americans, our tribe. She set an early example of how to look beyond your tribe and use your values, your real values, to determine your judgments. And I have never forgotten it. And you know, there are advantages to stepping out of your tribe. As a rabid Knicks fan, I was never able to see the virtues or skills of any person who didn't play for my team. There are people that I know intellectually are or were superlative players, but I couldn't even see their good traits because I was so identified with the Knicks. Once I learned to let go of my preferences for my tribe, the Catholics, the Irish, the Americans, history itself became much broader and more interesting, a fuller picture and a more human one. So let's engage in that moral effort that Orwell talks about. Let's see our biases and make the effort to look past them, to see reality as it is, and to act as our best selves, regardless of who or what our tribes might be. Make it so. Amen. Blessed be. Please stand, rise in body or spirit. We're going to sing hymn number 1031 in the green